our speakers. Would you like to introduce our first speaker?
Yes, I would love to. So we are very, very honoured to have Alexandra Hudson speaking, and she is an award-winning writer, political commentator, and just overall freedom-loving extraordinaire. She makes up one of three of our panel, and could you tell us about the other two?
We also have Roy Spence, a successful business owner and someone who believes in running a business with a conscience, as well as Alexander McCobbin, who is the CEO of Conscious Capitalism. Now, both Roy and Alexander subscribe to this philosophy, as well as this organisation called Conscious Capitalism, which is what we're going to be hearing all about. Now, Alexander McCobbin, though, was also one of the co-founders of Students for Liberty, and I know we have a lot of students watching right now who are members of Students for Liberty in various parts around the world, and it's wonderful to be able to have him here with us to be able to participate in this discussion. So, Roy, Alexander, and Alexandra, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
All right, Alexandra, let's start with you. What have you got prepared for us today on the topic of capitalism with a conscience? What does that even look like? I mean, isn't capitalism just about money?
It's more than just about money. Are we supposed to do the remarks we prepared?
Yes, this would be the time for that, yes.
Wonderful. So thank you. My name is Alexandra Hudson, and I'm really thrilled to be with you to talk about social norms and civil society as essential for free markets and general human flourishing. First on civility, I'd like to start with a story. In mid-January, my husband and I were walking to church, and it was a serene, quiet Sunday morning, and all of a sudden, we were jarred by the sound of a man blaring his horn and yelling at a poor couple at the car in front of him that were trapped in gridlock traffic. In case you're wondering, yes, the man honking his horn was driving a white Mercedes. Now, normally in these situations, I'm more the one to speak up and address the situation, but my husband tends to be more deterred by social awkwardness. But this situation was so egregious that before I could do anything, he approached the man and just asked him to relax a little bit. There were worshipers, after all, in 3 churches within earshot that the man was disturbing. Quickly, the bully turned his rage on us, shouting at us not to get involved, but he did stop honking. This story illustrates 2 truths. 1, there will always be jerks in the world that make life difficult. And 2, we should not always look at the government to stop them. As long as human communities have existed, people's social and selfish natures have been in tension. To restrain mankind's selfish impulses and allow our social natures to flourish, communities have erected formal and informal institutions so that we can live together. Formal institutions include our laws and our systems of government, while informal institutions are the unwritten cultural norms that help us navigate social life together. When people break our laws, our formal institutions jump into action: police officers, prosecutors, the courts. When people break our social norms, like the man in the white Mercedes, we need to. And if we don't, the government will. We've seen examples of this around the world and here at home. Some years ago, for example, the Israeli Knesset introduced a bill to prevent queue jumping, which would have made failing to stand in line a criminal offense. In the early aughts, New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg launched a politeness campaign which fined people for putting their feet on subway seats, playing music too late at night, and other thoughtless behavior. Unsurprisingly, these efforts didn't work. But our formal and informal institutions are essential for human communities to survive and thrive. Formal institutions alone aren't enough to have a flourishing society because they address only the most egregious examples of selfishness. For the law to prevent these petty acts of selfishness in our everyday would require a far more powerful, centralized surveillance state, something perhaps like China's social credit system. To avoid this, we need cultural norms of self-governance and self-sacrifice, norms that encourage honesty, demonstrate trustworthiness, and promote consideration of the needs and well-being of our fellow citizens alongside our own.
Unmute.
A state that investigated and incarcerated people for all insensitive offenses would be totalitarian.
Okay, so we need to make Sydney studio.
Double dipping at a cocktail party, for example, is gross and selfish, but you shouldn't be thrown in jail at gunpoint for doing so. We need social norms to address the relatively minor offenses that the law appropriately doesn't punish. Edmund Burke wrote that manners are more important than laws. Manners are what vex or soothe, corrupt or purify, exalt or debase, barbarize or refine us by a constant, steady, uniform, insensible operation, like that of the air we breathe. According to their quality, they aid morals, or they supply them, or they totally destroy them. Civility encompasses both self-governance and holding others accountable, both of which allow our government to remain limited and our life together to remain possible, not to mention pleasant. Next is civil society, which, like civility, is an essential buttress for free and democratic societies like our own. Civil society refers to the spontaneous associations that arise to solve problems and build community. We know that government can't solve all our problems, and history shows us that we wouldn't want them to try. Without civility, which is again people's self-sacrifice for the sake of others, people will demand the government step in and manage our conduct. And the same is true for civil society. When it is weak, government steps in. There is much in life that we cannot achieve alone, and so civil society is the mechanism by which groups of citizens join together around a common purpose instead of looking to government to help. Civility is a necessary building block that strengthens civil society. If everyone acted like the man in the white Mercedes, after all, we'd all be bowling alone. Alexis de Tocqueville, in his famous exploration of American democracy, described local governance and civil society as a muscle. The more that the state and federal levels step in and do things for local communities, the weaker it becomes. This is problematic because our spirit of association is one of the things that make free people and free societies great. In recent years, a number of researchers, writers, and commentators have stated and perpetuated a monolithic narrative of social, cultural, and civic declinism. We're not bowling together anymore, they say, and America and other democratic nations are in trouble. Many took this idea, originally made famous by Harvard researcher Robert Putnam, as the gospel truth when he wrote about it 20 years ago, and have been repeating it and reiterating it ever since. You might look around the state of your body politic and feel the same way. Populism, partisan brinksmanship, it all gives the impression that we are in a pretty bleak moment. But the reality is a lot more nuanced and hopeful than we might think. I've spent the last 2 years studying, writing about, and researching bright spots of American civic health and vibrancy across America and the world. And I've learned that the reality is far more hopeful than many feel. People across the country are working together at the micro level to do what no person can do alone and what no government policy can achieve. I found doctors who are doing their small part to bring price transparency to a broken and convoluted American healthcare system. I've discovered a Silicon Valley CEO trying to fix our public discourse by inventing a new platform for intellectual dialogue. I've met a college student who built a chatbot technology that, during Hurricane Harvey, connected people whose homes had flooded in real time to available shelter. During the COVID-19 crisis, he quickly adapted his technology to connect the food insecure to open pantries. It's been especially wonderful to watch the outpouring of innovation and neighborliness during the pandemic, where this need is so great and the problem is so complex that all we can really do is help one another in small, concrete ways in our everyday. People sewing masks for one another, delivering groceries and doing errands for the elderly, getting meals to hospital workers, developing drone technology to deliver medical supplies in rural areas, and so much more. Times of crisis reveal who we are, and there is a lot to be proud of when it comes to how everyday Americans have responded to the COVID-19 crisis. There are people all across the world and all across our societies that know that they can't fix everything, but they're doing what they can to make the world a better place in small but important ways. In addition to allowing our government to be limited in nature, our norms, civility, civil society, and voluntarily choosing to be a part of our community build trust that allow our democratic and free market institutions to flourish. Sociologist Ernst Gellman found in his book, Conditions of Liberty, that airdropping markets and democracy on post-Soviet countries didn't work. The reason? They lacked the culture of trust and civic friendship that is necessary to see societies flourish. Adam Smith made this same point in his theory of moral sentiments. For free social and economic institutions to survive, we need sympathy for our fellow man, charity, and private virtue. Smith also made an important observation about human flourishing. To survive, we need justice, a negative obligation we have to avoid actively harming people, to do what we can to avoid being like the gentleman in the white Mercedes. But to flourish, we need beneficence. Beneficence is the positive obligation we have to actively help and do good for others. Our freedom is sustained through our everyday exchanges, nourished through the decisions we make every day to respect our fellow citizens. The freedom we each have to support or degrade our society through our conduct is what Edward Shills called the antinomy of liberalism, or the freedom we each have to undermine our own freedom. Our everyday conduct are small but important threads that weave and strengthen the tapestry of our civilization, democracy, and our democracy. Acting with civility, building civil society, our freedom, our civilization, they depend on them both. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Alexandra. Really appreciate that and those insights and those thoughts. And certainly there's an argument to be made that civil society is under strain in a way that we haven't seen in a very long time, but I'm sure we'll get to some of those questions in the Q&A session afterwards. Thank you so much for that. Now, Roy, you're a successful business owner in your own right, but what is this conscious capitalism thing?
Hi, greetings from the States. Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to talk about, this is such a great time and a venue to talk about conscious capitalism. In this time of COVID, when governments are stepping up to save us all while crushing our economy, when progressives and socialists are laying the blame for world poverty, environmental catastrophes, and social inequities squarely on the doorstep of businesses, and our young people are fed up with toxicity and soullessness of much of the corporate world, there's no better time to talk about real solutions. You know, many people here in the US don't understand the origins of our prosperity. America, in their experience, has always been prosperous. So they don't really question how that came to be. And they're generally shocked when I tell them that for thousands of years, really since the beginning of time, 98% of the world's population has lived at a subsistence and poverty level. And it wasn't until the year 1776 that began to change. Not only, of course, was that the year of the birth of our country, but it was also the year that Adam Smith published The Wealth of Nations, a modern day handbook to capitalism as we know it. In the following 200 years, some remarkable things happened. After thousands of years of living at a subsistence level, the poverty level shrank from 98% to under 9%. World literacy soared from just 12% to 86%, and life expectancy globally doubled. So capitalism is indisputably the greatest idea and force for change the world has ever known. Now, I've experienced this firsthand. I had, and I'll admit, an advantaged childhood. Not just because I grew up in America, but because I grew up poor. So I learned at an early age, if I wanted something, I was going to have to work and earn it. So I'd be gathering recycled soda bottles along the side of the highway, or selling greeting cards or seeds door to door to my neighbors. I had numerous paper routes. Eventually I saved up and bought a secondhand lawnmower and started a business that way. So again, that's just how I scrapped through my life, my youth, and continued working like that through high school, and I earned my way through college and got a degree. After graduation, I went to work for a contracting firm that repaired leaky basements. Now, for those of you down under you may not be familiar with basements. That's a thing in America. We actually dig holes underneath our house to store things that we'll probably never use and have a place to watch our football games on the telly. But in any case, I was working for this firm and I quickly learned that it really wasn't an ethical company. It misled its customers, didn't stand behind their work. And I wasn't brought up that way. So I quit and I went to work for another waterproofing company. And I soon turned out that they too weren't ethical. In fact, as I surveyed the industry, no one was really doing quality ethical work. So I saw an opportunity. I had the princely sum of $1,700 in the bank, had a wife and a baby and a one-bedroom apartment and an F-150 pickup truck. But I put an ad in the paper, well, waterproof for food or essence, words to that essence. And that was the launch of my company. So today I'm very happy to say my company has grown from the world's smallest waterproofing company to one of the largest with over 100 trucks and over 215 employees. Most importantly, however, I've helped change the industry. The bad players were either forced out of business or forced to change the way they did their unethical practices. So this was really a triumph for conscious capitalism. So capitalism is all about opportunity. However, there are plenty of companies and individuals who approach it as opportunists. For them, it's about how they can prey on the unwary public, using unfair advertising, marketing techniques, sometimes outright fraud and deceit. We've all witnessed it in our communities and on the global scene where criminal scandals, market failures, environmental disasters, there are no shortages of the shortcomings and excesses of traditional capitalism. Recent surveys in the US have shown that over 40% of our young people actually think more favorably of socialism than they do capitalism. Now, I'm sure you're aware these young people haven't had to deal with socialism up close and personal as the poor souls in Venezuela are doing right now. But nevertheless, what they've seen of capitalism, they don't like. They've seen their parents hang on to jobs for years, the jobs that they didn't really like, just so they could get a pension, only sometimes to see that pension snatched away before they could collect it. They've seen corporations buy, sell, and downsize and lay off thousands of workers just so shareholders could get a higher return on their investment. It's little wonder our young people are disheartened. Study after study in the US has shown, and which isn't much better than most of the industrialized world, that less than 1/3 of the workforce feels engaged. In other words, they feel their work is important and they are appreciated. About half the workforce is disengaged and they're just slogging through to get a paycheck, which leaves nearly 20% of employees that, yes, are working against the company. So what's the answer to this dilemma? How can we harness the immense power of capitalism and make sure that it's used for good and not evil? Well, I believe there is an answer, and it's conscious capitalism. Conscious capitalism is the belief and practice of conducting our businesses for profit and for purpose. Conscious capitalism believes that decisions can and must be made for the benefit of all stakeholders, not just shareholders. Stakeholders include your employees, your vendors, your community, your environment, as well as the shareholders. Conscious capitalists believe that a company should exist for a higher purpose, a noble purpose, not just making money or to perpetuate itself. We believe organizations should have a healthy culture, a culture that treats employees, clients, and vendors with respect, that an employer has a responsibility to nurture and care for its employees as if they were its most valuable resource, because they are. Now, intuitively, one might think that, wow, running your business with a noble purpose and making decisions for the benefits of all shareholders, or stakeholders rather, and giving back to the community, that must wreak havoc on the bottom line of a company. To the contrary, business that practice the principles of conscious capitalism actually financially outperform ones that don't. Raj Sisodia published a book called Firms of Endearment, where they did a study over a 15-year period of over 20 companies that practice these conscious principles. And these companies outperform the Dow Jones average by a multiple of 9. So by operating consciously, they gain a substantial financial edge over their competitors. Now, there's other benefits of running a conscious capitalism, which I've experienced in my own company. In today's shrinking labor market, millennials, as well as many mature people who are seeking a higher level of purpose and self-actualization, will actually gravitate towards firms that operate with a higher purpose. And they will give you a discount to work for those companies. And this is a shrinking labor force, and the war for talent is real. And so by operating a conscious business, you're going to have a big advantage. You're going to have a more engaged and inspired workforce. You're going to have highly loyal and trusting customers. You're going to have committed, profitable suppliers. And you're going to exist in a thriving community and in a healthy environment. So conscious capitalism is a concept that's been around as long as capitalism. It's just how many of us choose to run our businesses. Since 2009, however, a formal organization has been established that allows practitioners to join together, encourage, learn from one another, and share best practices. Alexander McColvin, who's going to speak next, can talk about the great strides this organization, Conscious Capitalism, is making. So I believe in conscious capitalism. I believe that only conscious businesses operating in a free environment can bring about the social and economic changes that our world needs and craves. Recently, I heard someone say that capitalism is like a twin-engine plane that since its advent has really only been running on one engine. Now, I don't know about you, but that's not a plane I want to fly on, okay? But with conscious capitalism, our businesses can run full throttle, and we can achieve our goal of elevating humanity through business. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roy. Really appreciate those insights. And I personally always really value hearing from people that have walked the walk, have been successful in business. This is no disrespect to academics, but you're not reading from studies that have found that businesses have X, Y, Z, although you referenced a few, but you're doing that from the basis of having actually walked the walk. And I really appreciate that. And we've definitely got some questions for you towards the end of the session. But we're going to turn our attention first to Alexander, another successful business person, but also someone who founded Students for Liberty. So Alexander, you've been you must have begun courting the ideas of liberty and the sorts of concepts that we're talking about here at a relatively early age, I would suppose. So please share with us what you've prepared.
Well, first off, thank you to ATA for bringing us together. I've known Alex and Roy for years, but I've never been on a panel with either of you before, and I'm just thrilled to have this opportunity. And this is a timely conversation, and I want to start by just naming the elephant in the room with this panel, actually, which is that Milton Friedman, 50 years ago, on September 13th, 50 years ago, wrote an essay titled, "The Social Responsibility of Business is to Maximize Profit." He made a claim that is contrary to what conscious capitalism stands for. Conscious capitalism's fundamental premise is that profit is not an end in itself. That is not the purpose of business. Profit is a means to serving a higher end, like Roy talked about, something noble, something beautiful, something that is greater than profit. That's not to say that profit's bad, but it's an inversion of that relationship from what Friedman articulated 50 years ago. And there might seem to be a contradiction in this panel and topic at the Friedman conference here, but I want to name that to begin with because 15 years ago, before conscious capitalism existed, one of our founders, John Mackey, the founder of Whole Foods, had a debate with Milton Friedman in Reason magazine, published in 2005. And I want to quote the first two lines from Milton Friedman in that debate, where he said, "The differences between John Mackey and me regarding the social responsibility of business are for the most part rhetorical. Strip off the camouflage and it turns out we're in essential agreement." And this is important for understanding conscious capitalism and why this is so important in today's world, because rhetoric matters. Not only does rhetoric matter for helping more people understand the nature of capitalism and business, but also to help business people understand their purposes and drive their activities as well. Because what we've seen over the last 50 years since Friedman wrote that article are fundamental misunderstandings and a backlash against capitalism as people think that business is dehumanizing. The reason the Dilbert comic strips are so funny and so many people resonate with them is that their experience in business is one where they think they are cogs in a machine. They think that businesses aren't productive. They think that they're just making things up. The reason people look at the movie Wall Street and think of Gordon Gekko as the archetype of the business person, that greed is good, is because we've had leading thinkers in the libertarian movement like Ayn Rand say selfishness is a virtue, greed is good, and prioritize their interests over others, not in an ethical way, but as Roy was talking about, in unethical ways. There are bad actors in the system, and there are people who will use claims like profit is all that matters or shareholder primacy ought to dominate decision-making to take that to extremes and to do things that are not beneficial to everyone, that actively undermine the capitalist system. And if you read through the debate between Milton Friedman and John Mackey 15 years ago, you'll see Milton Friedman actually come around on many of the points that profit is a means to serve a higher purpose, that the best way to maximize profit is to take care of all of your stakeholders, finding win-win-win solutions where everyone benefits instead of prioritizing one group over another. Now, when that debate happened 15 years ago, in the world of business and in the social understanding of what business means, the idea of shareholder supremacy, of the purpose of business is to maximize profit, it's all about money, was dominant. The concept of conscious capitalism was seen as a joke or a fringe. It was literally laughed out of boardrooms and conferences. But over the last 15 years, since the founding of conscious capitalism, as these ideas have begun to gain traction in a significant way, we really started to see a tipping point 3 years ago when Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, wrote a letter to the companies that they invest in saying that they need to not only look at their short-term financial returns, but also look at their higher purpose and look to take care of all of their stakeholders. Then last year, we saw the Business Roundtable, an association of over 180 of the largest businesses in the United States, come out and repudiate the idea that their purpose is simply to maximize profit to serve shareholders, and instead say that business's purpose is to serve everyone and to create value for all of their stakeholders. And in this COVID pandemic era, many people questioned whether this trend would continue. People wondered whether this was just sugarcoating, whether it was greenwashing, that this was just businesses trying to cover up bad actions, get people to not notice what they were doing, but when they were actually still prioritizing profits at the expense of their people, of the other stakeholders they touch, and just go back to the way business was done before. But if you read the daily emails from Alan Murray, the editor-in-chief at Fortune magazine, he has proclaimed in the last 3 months that the debate of shareholder primacy versus stakeholder primacy, or stakeholder capitalism as he calls it, is over. Business leaders across the United States and the world are recognizing that the future of business depends on conscious capitalism, both because that's the way businesses are going to survive. It's understanding that profit is a byproduct of serving all of your people, not the single thing that you focus on, and that the future of a capitalist system in the world depends on everyone who interacts with it, employees, customers, suppliers, investors, all coming to understand that capitalism is this win-win-win value-creating machine that is focused on stakeholder orientation rather than just maximizing profits. Otherwise, the trend is likely to continue, as Roy was pointing out, where young people will continue to support anti-capitalist efforts, where there will be more attempts to undermine the foundations of a voluntary economic system that not only has created so much prosperity for humanity, but has the potential to create so much more, especially when businesses are run on conscious principles like a higher purpose, stakeholder orientation, conscious leadership, and conscious culture. And we see this with countless examples of business leaders like Roy in the conscious capitalism community. You know, Roy was talking about how in the basement ceiling business, he saw lots of unethical actors. To give another industry that we all think is emblematic of unethical activity, let's look at used car sales. As soon as you say that, you think unethical, sleaze, someone who's just trying to take advantage of you. And there's a company based out of Dallas, Texas that was called Drivers Select up until 2 years ago when it was rebranded. That, when it was founded, was a traditional used car sales company. It was trying to just move as much product as possible. It was driving people in 80-hour work weeks to the bone. It was even taking their CEO, Steve Hall, down to the lowest level, and he knew it was unsustainable. He was burning out. His people were burning out. Customers weren't coming back. And he wanted to do something different. When he discovered the conscious capitalism movement and began to infuse a purpose of creating joy for everyone that a used car company touches, he not only saw his employees' happiness improve, he started to see customers repeat their business. He saw his company grow 4x in a matter of years, and ultimately able to sell the company at a great profit and opportunity for everyone involved. And you have to think, if a used car sales company can be a conscious company, this can happen in any industry. This can happen for a business of any size, from a startup to a Fortune 500 company. And as we have more positive examples of the human beings that are a part of business, and as they create positive impacts on everyone that they touch, that has a ripple effect to show more people that business not only has the potential, but actively is creating value in their lives. So my key message to everyone here is to really think about the arguments and the stories you tell to explain what capitalism means, both to substantively understand it correctly and to help more people understand what it is as well. Selfishness as a virtue is not something that people are going to support, and it's wrong. Maximizing profit at the expense of the stakeholders and the people that a business touches, or using them as a means to maximize profit, is not something that people support. And it's a misunderstanding of business. It's an over-economization of what actual business people are doing, which is a whole other subject I'm happy to get into if we want to in Q&A. But really think about how to convey the way that capitalism and individual businesses can help everyone that they touch, can create progress for humanity and make lives better. Because that's what business and capitalism actually does. And we haven't communicated that nearly enough, either to business people themselves or to the world at large, until the conscious capitalism movement and the momentum that's been gaining lately and the opportunity for us to create a conscious capitalist future.
Thank you so much for that discussion. That was really fascinating to listen to. We're now going to jump into some questions from the audience listening. Alexandra, first up for you, we've had two similar questions from Michaela and Chris Bird asking a similar thing, which is, what role do you think technology has played in changing civil society? And are you optimistic or pessimistic going into the future on the impact that technology will have on civil society?
It's a great question. There's no question that technology has changed the landscape of our society, civil discourse and civil society. It's not only made it easier to offend and be offended. I mean, all of a sudden, one person's tweet is all around the world in 1 second, as opposed to it being localized 20 years ago when no one had smartphones and no one was on Twitter. So it definitely has been able to amplify a lot of the negativity that is kind of embedded in our culture and has always been there, I think. But it's also amplified really, really good things and good causes. We see using technology, new platforms like Patreon or GoFundMe, some of these incredible new technological resources that allow people to have startups, or what's it called, Kickstarter, and people that are able to support causes and individuals that they support or admire in small ways. And so I do believe technology is a tool that certainly can be used for ill, but we've also seen, and I hope we'll continue to see, technology used to bolster both creators and innovators at the local level, as we have already seen.
Fantastic, thank you. Roy and Alexandra, I have a question that's, I guess, to both of you. And it's come through in a few different forms from a few different people. But fundamentally, if someone's running a business and wants to move towards this conscious capitalism type of approach, what can they do that doesn't just end up being that tokenistic? We've all seen these companies that have their vision statement that sounds oh so very lovely, but doesn't actually really mean anything on the ground. It's very easy to write that kind of esoteric nonsense. It's a lot harder to really change a culture and really make a meaningful change in what your business really is, which is what we're talking about. So how would a business owner even approach that problem? Whichever of you wants to start, go for it.
Well, you've actually done this, so I encourage you to start.
Happy to do that. We have done that at our company. And of course, every company has a culture, just it's good or bad. Every company has a culture, and my company had a culture from the get-go. And my mission from the get-go was to do the right thing, for our homeowners, as well as our customers, as well as for our employees and things. But I never really defined it or put it down in writing. I just, I would train my people. This is how we do things. And I expected by osmosis. And when we were a small company, it kind of worked. Everybody was clear on how we did our work and even why we did our work and things. But as the company grew and I'm no longer training or working with everybody individually, it became clear that we needed to put these things and memorialize them in writing and use them in training and things like that. So we did a breakout session with the leaders of our tribe, as we call ourselves, and we defined what our mission was. And then we defined what our core values were. And yes, we put them on paper and then we put them on the wall. But most importantly, we put them into practice. So I've got crews that are working, outside the office. I've got people in the office, outside the office, outside people. But we started to use the language. Like Alexander said, rhetoric, language matters. And we started using that language to encourage people to recognize people who are following our core values. We would use it to discipline people who are not following our core values, myself included. I'm just as accountable for our core values as everybody else. So by having a defined mission and publicizing that and your core values and using those, we use them greatly in our recruiting. We find people whose core values resonate with ours. And I can teach them everything else. I can teach them about base and waterproofing, foundation repair. I can even teach them sales. I can teach them everything, but I can't teach them those core values. And so we actually end up attracting people who think and believe in the same thing we do. They want to make the world a better place. They want to be part of something bigger. They want to be a great tribal member. And they believe in working hard seriously and doing what they say they're going to do. And they have these same core values. So I would recommend that if somebody wants to start down this course, and it's got to start, as Alexander said, it starts with aware leadership. The leader's got to believe in this mission. He's got to be passionate about it. And then and only then can it thrive or survive or even thrive in an organization. And then you have to work on it daily and get people bought into it. And eventually, like I say, there's people who will opt out and say, well, this is not for me. That's totally good. But you will attract people that do. And I'm very proud of my tribe. I'm so happy. We've gone through some very difficult times, but we do it together. And it makes it so much more palatable. And we're such a stronger company because of that.
I really appreciate that point you made at the end. I recall reading many years ago Ricardo Semler's book, Maverick, where he talks about the transformation of his business, Semco, in Brazil. And he talked about the fact that, yes, most of his team came on the journey with him, but there were a few people who found that they were no longer compatible with the new company and what that stood for. And sometimes moving on does mean letting go of a few things along the way. Alexander, I want to throw, I guess, a similar question in essence that people have been asking, but this time more on the civil society side of things. And if you're not happy with the civil discourse in your area, the civil discourse that you find yourself amongst, what are some of the practical steps that an ordinary person, someone who doesn't have an unusual amount of leverage or influence, might be able to take to actually start to improve the quality of that discourse?
So this is...
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, which Alex were you referring to? They were misheard.
Sorry, I was directing that to Alexandra, but I'm more than happy for both of you to answer. Alexandra, do you want to start? And then if Alexander, you've got a comment, I'll be very happy to hear it.
Yes, happy to. It's one of the best things about our digital era where we're so connected. It's that it's easy. You're not limited by the people that you work with and that you go to school with and that live in your immediate vicinity. And it's easier to just find people with shared interests and not while we're in a pandemic, but to meet up and have a conversation. And even just these vibrant intellectual communities that exist around great public intellectuals like Russ Roberts, and he's great. The host of Econ Talks podcast. Whenever he's in a city, he'll just say, "I'm at this bar," and like 40 people who just love Russ Roberts and Econ Talks, and Adam Smith will like meet up there, and then they'll know there are other people in Austin, Texas, or wherever he is that also have shared loves, which is kind of the basis of fundamental community and friendship. And so, like we talked about just a few minutes ago, technology or digital era is a double-edged sword, but it can and has been and is being used for good.
Alexander?
I'll tie these two questions in with each other by saying that for whether you're talking about your business or society at large, the key is to not only walk the talk, which we hear about frequently, but also to talk the walk as well. It's critical for people to model the change they want to see in their business or in their society, to be the best representatives possible. But you can't assume that people are going to understand what you're doing simply when you act. Communication is very difficult. People interpret things in different ways, and you have to continually explain what you're doing to others to spark that conversation, make the connection between your action and the values that they represent. And so whether it's acting on your values in a company and then explaining how your actions are representative of those values, like Roy was talking about, or if you are being a productive member of civil society discourse, like Alex was talking about, and then explaining the principles behind that and why you're doing it, it's really important to do both. It's to do the right thing and explain that, to open that conversation and help more people see the way that it's playing out.
That's actually becoming almost a theme that's coming out in this conference. We heard from Ayaan Hirsi Ali, obviously a completely different person and talking about completely different things, but she was very strong also on this issue of actually we need to start speaking more and articulating more the way that we would like to see the world be. And I believe you've got one last question before we finish up.
Yes, I have been told that Alexander did promise to play the ukulele during his presentation.
We haven't forgotten Alexander.
We haven't forgotten Alexander. So I'm also particularly interested in this because I actually did just pick up a new tenor ukulele a few weeks ago. It was one of my tasks while I'm in lockdown. But where is your ukulele, Alexander?
Tim did twist my arm and get me to agree to my first public performance, not of the ukulele, but the harmonica, which I've learned during COVID here. So I apologize to everyone up front for Tim insisting on this. Yes, Roy, you've got the right idea, but let's see how we do.
Well, bravo. I have to say, this has just suddenly gotten a little bit weird for me because my grandfather, my mother's father, used to entertain the family by playing the ukulele, and he had a holder that held a mouth organ for himself. and he would entertain us all by telling jokes and then playing songs on the ukulele and the mouth organ. So I'm finding this just a little bit trippy at the moment. But thank you so much to all three of you. We really appreciate your time, the effort that you've put into everything you've said today, and all that you're doing to try and make the world a better place and to try and deliver a little bit more freedom for all of us and a better form of capitalism, a conscious capitalism as well, and a better civil discourse. We really appreciate your time, and we really appreciate you being a part of the 24 Hours of Liberty. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for hosting this and for everyone watching.
Great
No problem. It is absolutely our pleasure.